following podcast is recorded and produced by Emerge, a media creators co-op, in affiliation with the network at bicbp-radio.com.
Hey, what's up, buddy? Welcome back to another episode of Get and Loser. We're starting a podcast. You know who it is. It's your boy, Sean.
Who the fuck is Sean? This is your boy Chop. Not his ducky shirt today.
It's your boy Yoder.
Trying to be professional this week, man. Okay.
Professional. Has you ever watched our show before?
Okay, so yeah, obviously, I think I said on the pod last week we have a very big best this week. Very exciting. Very big story. So just real quick, this week we're joined by a woman named Christen Civiletto, who's an environmental lawyer, author, law school adjunct at SUNY Buffalo Law, and former Niagara Falls resident. She earned her law degree from Vanderbilt Law School and has spearheaded litigation on behalf of hundreds of sick Niagara County residents in high-profile toxic tort cases against municipalities and major chemical polluters. Civiletto is also a co-host of the popular Bookstorm podcast, on which she has interviewed hundreds of authors, including Barbara Kingsolver, David Baldacci, Greg Hurwitz, Carolyn Fraser, Daniel Silva, Marshall Karp, Fiona Davis, and many more beloved writers. Her forthcoming release, Thundering Waters, The Toxic Legacy of Niagara Falls, Princeton University Press / Island Press imprint, June 30th, 2026, interweaves environmental crime, history, and memoir, and exposes the astonishing story of exploitation and ongoing abuse lurking in the shadows of one of the world's most treasured natural wonders. So, thank you, Christen, for joining us. Very exciting.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for that nice introduction. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This is something we've been talking about wanting to do for a while. The love, anybody who lives in the falls or near the falls obviously grew up hearing stories about Love Canal. Is a very big deal here. Like I've said on the spot before, I grew up on 91st, but that was like early 2000s-ish. So by then, as far as we knew, at least, that, it wasn't really as much of a danger anymore. But we'd always hear stories, from my mom. She'd, hey, stay out of Love Canal, you'll come back with extra toe, It became kind of like a folklore around here in Niagara Falls. So when I'd first originally put up the post about, originally I was hoping to find people that had lived in Love Canal when the disaster happened and were part of the evacuation. And our buddy John Fiden, shout out to Fiden, he took my post, shared it in a bunch of groups, and then a bunch of people kept tagging Christen, so I got in touch with her. We talked on the phone for a little bit, and we were like, you know what? This is literally the perfect person to have on. So I'm very excited. Thank you for being here. This is big for us. So
absolutely, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. So if you want to just real quick for people who don't know, basically what the Love Canal disaster is.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times people hear Love Canal from outside the area, and they know it because it was a disaster that brought about new law in the United States. But for all of us here, Love Canal is much more personal and has lingering effects. And, very basically, it was an environmental disaster that opened our eyes to the fact that we had hazardous waste buried all over Niagara Falls and, frankly, all over the United States. And hazardous waste doesn't stay buried. It moves and it migrates. And as that disaster unfolded, we started to learn a lot more about hazardous waste and why we should be really worried about it. And in particular, that particular situation really changed the way that we handle environmental disasters. So it was a very significant situation. And as people familiar with it know, it involved a very peaceful suburban neighborhood in a part of Niagara Falls known as LaSalle. And as information started to come to the surface, so to speak, we learned that people were in the crosshairs of a lot of danger and a lot of poisons that were on the move. And we can absolutely dive in. Its roots actually go back to the 1890s.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't know it went that deep. Yeah, I mean, like I said, when I was growing up, we heard like, obviously, my parents told us like the basics of it, but it wasn't probably till I was in like my teens, maybe early 20s, that I really started to look into it and really started realizing like how bad it actually was. Like it was a very big thing. It was huge.
Mhm.
Like it was national news. Like
Yes.
Rich was saying before, the pod started. It was, literally people that don't even have never even lived here. You mentioned Love Canal. You said they know. They know it's
Absolutely.
so.
Well, we can go right back to the 1890s. A lot of people
Okay.
don't know where the roots of Love Canal originally were, but two big things were going on in the falls at that time. Electricity was, I mean, literally surprising the world in terms of what can be done with electricity. And
Mhm.
so we had a lot of dreamers who came to Niagara Falls in the 1890s and even before that, frankly. And a man named William T. Love came here in about 1892, and he had this great idea. He said, I'm going to dig a canal that goes from the upper Niagara River, skips the falls, and goes to the escarpment area in Lewiston. And that way we can generate a lot of movement with water and create our own power for what he wanted to call model city. This was going to
Mhm.
be a perfect city, where people behaved and I don't think there was drinking allowed and everybody would be working full time. And he really envisioned it as an industrial utopia. And so this guy got money together. He went all over the state actually trying to find money to fund his digging. And he started digging in two places. One of them was on the upper river, right at the 102nd Street area. And the other one was at the escarpment in Lewiston. Let's go to the one on the upper river. He
Okay.
starts digging, it's hard going. He's encountering bedrock. There's all kinds of equipment failures. These men were working very hard. He got about a half mile in and he had to abandon this project. He ran out of money. Um, Another couple things were going on that really put a stop to his progress. For example, a new form of electrical power was coming online. And when we talk about, power shaping Niagara Falls, this was a very, very pivotal time. We started using alternating current. And one of the first plants in the entire world at the time, the largest plant, was here in Niagara Falls. That is the Adams plant. And that put him basically out of business. What he was doing was pretty obsolete. He was going to be relying on generating electricity for direct current. So William T. Love, he had borrowed a lot of money. He had bought a lot of property from people in Niagara County. And this became a little bit of a disaster. Everybody was like, is he going to make good on what he's doing? Is he just going to leave the canal there? Well, he abandoned it. In fact, at some point in your story, we don't know where he went exactly.
Of course.
Right? That
Yeah, of
that
course.
trench that he built filled with water. And a lot of people in Niagara Falls began to swim in it, recreate in it, including my grandfather. So,
Oh boy.
right? So we've got this trench, it's filled with water, it's attracting kids, and nobody thought too much of it. However, in the 1940s, we had a numerous amount of chemical companies who were producing big time chemicals in Niagara Falls. A lot of people don't know this, but the chloralkali industry was born here. And these are heavy duty chemicals. They're used in pesticides. And during the war, they were gearing up to provide really significant chemicals to the federal government. Well, when you make chemicals, you've got a lot of waste. And nobody knew where to put this waste. So they looked around Niagara Falls and they said, we've got some empty lots. And ooh, how nice, we have this canal. Why don't we start putting waste there? And that's what the Hooker Chemical Company did. the stories are that while kids were swimming, they were backing up tanker trucks, letting the spigots go and putting chemicals in there, right? Years go by. Eventually, Niagara Falls is growing, and the Niagara Falls School Board says, we really want this property from you, Hooker Chemical. So we'd like to buy it from you. And they ultimately did for $1. And Hooker Chemical, they covered it. There was a layer of dirt that was put over it. And it looked for all the world like a nice place to go ahead and build a school, which is what they did. They put 99th Street School right on top. Now, unfortunately, there was a school kitty corner, and that was 93rd Street School. There were homes that were springing up in the area, and Bell Aerospace also put community housing for some of its workers right around the canal area as well. So that brings us up to the 1950s, and what unfolds over the next 2 decades is an incredible story. Do you remember some of that from, your parents telling you stories about what occurred? Because you probably pick it up right at the blizzard of 77.
Oh yeah, my one of my mom's favorite stories to tell growing up is the blizzard of 77. She talks about it constantly. She lived downtown at the time of blizzard of 77, but she brings it up constantly. It's all we ever hear about. We hear the jokes about, oh, well, we survived the blizzard of 77. And I'm like, yeah, Mom, I get it. We understand. We understand how big it was.
It was a really big deal. But one of the unintended consequences of that was Love Canal. So I want to back up before the blizzard happened. Something crazy happened in 1968 that a lot of people don't know. The LaSalle Expressway was being put in. And as the workers were doing the construction for the LaSalle Expressway, all of a sudden, all these chemicals started bubbling to the surface. They knew right away, this is Hooker stuff. So they call Hooker. Hooker comes on over. They look at it and they said, yep, this is our stuff. Well, the Department of Transportation for New York State was doing the project. And basically Hooker said, we'll do some preliminary testing for you, but you need to take care of this. This is your project. And that's what happened. The Department of Transportation, originally they started sending it to the Hyde Park Bloody Run landfill. And at some point the manager there said, no more. So the DOT went to Wheatfield and they said, hey, town of Wheatfield, we'll give you $1,000 if you take this huge amount of chemical waste that's surfacing in 1968. And the town did. And they put it in a huge pit, unlined, no cap, nothing, behind a neighborhood. So that's 60.
Money talks.
Right? So we should have known about Love Canal in 1968. A lot of people don't know that. A few years go by, we have a blizzard in 1977. And as your mom said, this was big news in Southern Ontario, Niagara Falls, in Buffalo. A tremendous amount of snow fell, coming off the lake. It was blowing off the lake. And when all that snow melted, it started the process of chemicals going into that now covered up canal, and it created what we call a bathtub effect. And so chemicals started overflowing, migrating into the soil, into sewers, and pushing into homes underneath them and through the walls of their basements. And that is some of the initial story of how Love Canal got rolling.
Gee, that's so during the time, well, after the effects of the blizzard of 77, that's the school and all that's still there, right? At that time?
Absolutely. 2 schools. So we had 93rd in full operation and we had 99th. And I want to tell you, because some of your listeners may remember this, the students at 99th Street were starting to report that when they would walk across the field to their homes, they were getting stuck. And their boots were getting stuck in this sludgy, gross, disgusting stuff. The principal told me before she passed away that her custodian had a special shovel just to try to unstick boots out of this muck. Jeez. And that was the chemicals coming up, right? And these students didn't know better, but they were suffering chemical burns. When they lose their shoe, they were stepping in it. And they were playing in this stuff. I mean, they're kids. Some of the stuff looks really cool. It looks like rainbow colors.
Wow.
At 93rd Street School, the students started noticing some unusual things too. They saw a black material in the drain of the big pool. That pool had to be drained a lot of times because there was black stuff coming up in it. And out on the baseball diamonds, a lot of the players told me that they were always jumping over these oily puddles that were out in the outfield. So we had inklings that there were serious problems from 68. In fact, I will tell you something interesting that also happened in 68. A woman and her son were walking between 97th and 99th. She started to sink. And newspaper reports say that she was falling into quicksand.
What?
They knew exactly what it was. They were working on the project and all that stuff had just been unearthed. She was 10 days after it all came up. So they knew that there was significant problems. But fast forward to the 70s, that's when people started to complain. There were some really bad odors. They started noticing some black stuff coming in their basements. And one family actually had their in-ground pool pop out of the ground. And when they looked inside where the hole was, it was a swirl of rainbow colors.
Oh my God. That's
Absolutely
serious.
horrendous. You know what the
That's
city
crazy.
did? Pumped it out.
Of course.
That was their solution. And it was thousands and thousands of gallons of this material. But that was the Shorter family. They started to make some connections with their children who had some very significant health impairments. And that's when things started to make the news. And an incredible reporter, his name is Michael Brown, he started covering the swimming pool story. And then he started covering other people who were noticing health problems. And this is, of course, where Lois Gibbs comes in and the story gets rolling from there.
Nice. Well, shout out to that reporter, man, bringing some eyes to it. That's crazy. So I mean, it's safe to say that there was just a lot of like government, like corruption, just keeping all of this stuff under wraps.
Yeah, I'm not sure how some people sleep at night because there is no question that they knew there were significant problems. In fact, before 1978, when everything kind of exploded, the city of Niagara Falls actually brought in a company called Calspan. And Calspan did some testing and they said, we're finding chemicals in the air, in the basements, and you all need to cover that, cut off the sump pumps, and take some other actions with more testing and study. Do you know what the county health did? They bought fans for people.
Oh my
Put fans
God.
in the basement.
Fans.
Right? Again, how do these people sleep at night? And let's be honest, Love Canal is not even the biggest dump site in Niagara Falls, and it's one of many. There are dozens upon dozens. In fact, there's more than 89.
I'm sorry, you said 89?
Oh, yes. We have so many sites in Niagara Falls that an EPA official told me that every resident lives within a half mile of a toxic dump site in Niagara Falls.
So there's stuff like this like still happening today, right now, and nobody's doing anything about it.
Well, we got a couple things going on today. First of all, the Love Canal site, let's just use that as an example. First of all, the chemicals are barricaded there. So there's no side and there's no bottom to Love Canal. They have a system where they are trying to capture water that comes out the bathtub and treat it. And that's their system. It's a system that, I hope it works. And then on top of the dump, they put first a clay liner on part of it. And then on a bigger part, they put what's called a high density polyethylene liner. It's like a glorified garbage bag. It's 40 mil, which is 1 millimeter. Mils are plastic sheeting measurements. So it's 1 millimeter, which is like a very thick credit card. That's what they put on top of Love Canal. Now, that liner, who knows how long those liners last, is 42 years old. We have liners like that all over Niagara Falls because of how many sites we have that had to be barricaded and covered.
That's
Wow.
insane. I I didn't realize it was that serious. Like I didn't realize it was that bad still.
And we know that several of these sites are migrating currently.
Mhm.
Canada does what's called a caged mussel study. And I hate that they do this with these creatures, but they put these mussels in cages and they
Mhm.
put them at certain points along the Niagara River. So, for example, they have one at the bottom of the gorge near the Hyde Park dump site. And every year they look and see what kinds of toxins are in these mussels. Well, based on what's in those mussels, we know that certain dump sites are leaking. We've got 4 big ones right now. There were 3 dump sites and 1 sewer. Let's put it that way. So, for example, some of the stuff that's coming out of the Hyde Park Bloody Run dump site,
Mhm.
which is an astonishing story in and of itself, those are still being found in the caged mussels. And the last report in 2023 that I read said, we're finding Murex and other heavy duty chemical compounds.
So is this like I don't know if what they would actually call it, but I've always known it as like Garbage Hill. Is that a big thing too? Because I
It
live pretty
is.
close to that actually. Unfortunately for me.
Yeah. I'm assuming you're referring to what we sometimes also call Mount Seacos in the middle of Niagara
Yeah.
Falls.
Yeah.
Yes. That is a mixed waste facility. It was accepting toxic waste for a very long time. It also
Mhm.
has municipal waste. And at one point, that site in particular was designated as a priority site because it was migrating chemical compounds into the Niagara River, which means it was moving pretty significantly far away. A lot of what was coming out of that site was also coming from next door, from a site called Necco Park. And no one's ever heard of Necco Park, except you should, because it is ginormous. So if Love Canal, let me give you these numbers just so you can understand the scale that we're talking about. Love
Okay.
Canal, the chemical company Hooker, which became Occidental, they
Mhm.
admit to 21,800 tons of waste. Okay, so that's 21,800. Guess what Necco Park is? DuPont
What?
admits to 93,000 tons of
Holy
hazardous.
shit. That's
Wow.
that's
Many times bigger than
catastrophic.
Love Canal.
Then you got
Necco
Yeah.
Park was mixing with Seacos, and all of this was making its way to the Niagara River.
God.
It's astonishing. And I could go on and on. I haven't even told you about one of the worst ones next to our drinking water plant.
Oh boy.
From what I understand, Goodyear was another culprit.
You're spot on. Yeah, and still is, right? In fact, my first house was under the plume of Goodyear. We lived on Devlin Avenue in Niagara Falls. And I went to 60th Street School. And now when I look at the plume maps, which show all the pollutants coming out of Goodyear, they model how far they go. My house is right underneath the plume. And it's kind of distressing to see that. It's terrible, actually. But Goodyear was next to at least 10 other sites, most of which are Superfund sites. That's how contaminated they were. So you had Union Carbide, you had Occidental, we had the solvent chemical company, we had DuPont, we had Olin, all Superfund sites or state Superfund sites, which means they were pretty seriously contaminated and are still being pumped and treated every day, 24 hours a day.
So I don't know if this I'm not sure exactly how true this is, but I live in Expressway Village, which is over on Porter Road, by it's literally right over the bridge from Niagara Falls High School. And a lot of the older residents that live there will tell me that there used to be another park farther in the back, and they say that they took that park out because there was tons of chemical dumping back there. So do you
Yes.
know?
I think that's that might have been Forest Glen.
Oh,
Is that
nice.
familiar?
Wonderful.
Yeah, that was
Wonderful. I'm glad I live
evacuated.
right there. That's nice.
And it's unacceptable, Sean, because in my view, and you tell me if this is the case for all of you as well, nobody warned us. I never remember getting a letter saying stay out of Cuga Creek. I grew up playing in Cuga Creek.
Yeah, me
And
too.
right? And I had a cancer diagnosis at 31 years old, and it was pretty rare, and I don't understand how nobody told us to stay out. In fact, not to just bombard people with all these sites, but there was another site near our house on Cuga Drive when we moved from Devlin to Cuga Drive.
Hmm.
Right at the end of Cuga Drive, diagonal from Dee Dee's, is a horrendous site, the Charles Gibson site. That thing was leaking BHC cake into Cuga Creek. It was so contaminated they had to reroute the creek in order to try to remediate. Nobody sent me a letter. No one sent my parents a letter. No one said stay out of Cuga Creek. At least that I know of. I don't remember anybody telling me to stay out. And it's unacceptable.
Yeah, I swam in there many times with my friends growing up, and nobody ever, nobody would ever tell us, hey, you should probably get out of there. They just be like, oh, just kids having fun. So that's nice. That's good to know. But
That's why
yeah, I
there's
was gonna,
no fish, warnings on Cuga Creek and the Niagara River for that reason.
yeah, I was gonna say too. Somebody was telling me the other day that here in like the state of or like in Niagara Falls or something, that there's like the cancer rates are extremely high,
Yes.
Yes.
and that's got to be because of all the toxic dumping, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm looking right now at a list of all the counties in New York State, and it's from 2018 to 2022. Those are the figures that they used. So,
Mhm.
we're always lagging behind a little bit,
Mhm.
right? So, if you look at 2018 to 2021, guess what county was the highest in New York State for cancer incidence of all malignant sites for men and women? Niagara. If you factor in 2022, I'm looking right at it. Niagara is now number 2 by 1 point.
Jesus.
And that's for all malignant. Here it says all cancer sites, all races, both sexes, cancer incidence. I think that people should be up in arms about this one piece of paper alone, let alone
Yeah.
the fact that we lead the pack on numerous other chronic illnesses, as well as things like suicide. We're almost double the state average, Niagara County.
I did not know that
I didn't
actually.
know that either. I always thought Syracuse was.
That's crazy.
Terrible.
Wow.
And again, that's why I wrote this book, because
Mhm.
I want people to have the big picture in front of them, because I don't think anybody's ever assembled this picture of exploitation and it literally started, let's be honest, in the 1600s, right? We have this consistent plundering of Niagara Falls and the Niagara Frontier, and it's made people billions in profits. But those profits were earned on our backs. We're the ones
Yeah.
dealing now with the health effects and the ruined environment and the city that, let's be honest, is in ruins in places, right? And it's not okay.
I agree. I kind of wanted to just real quick. I wanted to circle back on like the early Love Canal disasters. I know you mentioned the Shorter family. What were some other? Do you know of any other warning signs in the beginning where other families were starting to realize, like, okay, this has got to be connected somehow.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, several families, including the Schroeder's parents, started noticing a black sludgy material coming into their basement. It was just dripping in, and then they would wipe it and it would come back. In Griffin Manor, which was a series of courts, it was low income housing. My grandparents lived there for a time. They started noticing some of the same things in the basement. I've had a lot of people tell me, for example, that their parents would make them use a toothbrush and try to scrub this black stuff out of the basement walls. And they thought it was mold. They thought they could just clean it up. It wasn't mold. It's something called NAPL, non-aqueous phase liquid. And it's one of the ways chemicals, move through soil. So we call it, it's non-aqueous. It doesn't move with water. It's moving through the soil. It's like a sludge. And these families were noticing some of the physical signs. You know, they could smell things. They would see fires spontaneously combust. But then they started putting two and two together when it came to health. And that's where Lois Gibbs comes into this story and did just a tremendous job. She started counting how many people had a miscarriage, how many people had a heart attack. She knew that her son was having some effects at the school, at 99th Street School. So she started going door to door and asking other parents, what's happening in your house? And, you know, this was not easy work. People were aggravated. They were like, why are you bothering us with this? Our property values are going to go down. But Lois Gibbs and a group of other primarily women got together and started documenting what they were learning. And when you look at that picture on paper, it's shocking. I've seen actually their charts that they were making, and you see illness, cancer, chronic illness, miscarriage, heart attack. So that's what they were doing, is putting together kind of a visual picture of what was happening at Love Canal. You couldn't deny there was a problem by that point.
No. So do you think, like you just said, you know, there's at that point there's no denying that there's something going on. Do you think once, you know, this stuff started getting brought to, you know, government officials and people in charge, when it started getting brought to their attention, you think any of them, you know, you think any of them were actually ever listening, or you think any of them, you think they were ever transparent with the people after, or do you think it took like people realizing on their own what's happening for them to finally be like, oh, okay, you know, now we'll admit that we, you know, we kind of messed up?
Yeah, I don't think that there's been an acknowledgement of what a poor job the government did. And the government's not great at investigating things and acting quickly like this. Let's, you know, be straight about that. In the Love Canal situation, the state and federal government were really going at each other because the state wanted federal help. They said, this is too big for us. This is too expensive. We think the federal government needs to come in. And President Jimmy Carter at the time, he did step in. So initially in 1978 in August, there was a declaration of an emergency just for the first ring of people. And the federal government was working with the state government at that time, issuing a declaration of emergency, getting some funds. They didn't hear too much from the federal government for the next 2 years. And the state got bogged down in testing, finding money for more testing, listening to the people's complaints and trying to answer questions, and it would devolve into a shouting match. It was a difficult couple years. One of the things that I think scared everybody, and this is what got the state government to really act a little bit at this point, was they discovered in November of 1978 that there was dioxin present. Now, dioxin is one of those things, it doesn't occur naturally. It's a leftover from chemical manufacture, incomplete combustion, things like that. Well, dioxin is extraordinarily deadly. And when they learned that not only was dioxin coming up in sump pumps, but at 93rd Street School,
Wow.
that spurred a lot of action there. That was a scary moment for people. But another one happened when they did chromosomal testing, and they realized that people in Love Canal had damage to their DNA. So again, that spurred some activity. But overall, I think there's been a pretty frustrating relationship with the state government, with the county government. And I'm not sure that anybody had a good experience trying to get them to act.
That's unfortunate that, you know, it's so many people suffered and are still suffering from it, and it's kind of just still being swept under the rug,
Yeah.
even now. I was gonna say, you think it's safe to say then, like, that they're basically, you know, they single-handedly basically were killing these people and not really, you know, not really even shrugging their shoulders about it.
Yeah. And And that's part of the issue that I have as an attorney. In 2011, something happened that is very concerning, should be a concern to everybody. The city of Niagara Falls was doing some digging in sewers at Love Canal. And in January of 2011, in the middle of a snowstorm, they opened up a sewer and oops, there's Love Canal Napple, that waste that we were talking about a second ago. They knew it right away. They know the smell. It was a lot. In fact, there was so much there that it poured into a house on Colvin Boulevard a little further down. And that family had to evacuate for almost a year. Okay, so we're talking about a lot of stuff. And at the time, officials said, oh, we think it's left over from Love Canal from the 1970s. It must not have gotten cleaned when we cleaned the sewers. Okay. The problem is, I've personally seen it, that sludgy material is coming up in basements and in sump pumps, all down gradient from Love Canal. And do I think there's a current problem? Yes, I do. Are they listening? No, they're not. I know people, and I have sent pictures and videos and test results, and it has been an uphill battle. Not sure why we're doing this again. It's almost like we didn't learn any lessons.
Well, it's funny because obviously you and I are about the same age, and I remember when Carter came, and I remember there was a big protest at 99th Street School, and then everybody talked about Superfund, and it was just, silly movies about all this stuff, and Lois Gibbs became a big national celebrity. And then I think like by the 80s, everybody's like, oh, well, we cleaned it up. It's all better now, right? It just felt like, well, Superfund took care of it all. There's not a problem anymore. But if you think about all the places that had to be closed and torn down, and some of the buildings when you drive down Buffalo Avenue, but the thing that's been the most disturbing for me, having lived in Niagara Falls my whole life, and I live in DeVoe, not that it's, which is on the other side of Niagara Falls, an older neighborhood, predates a lot of the chemical companies. But even when they were cleaning up the road, when they were redoing Lewiston Road, they had to stop redoing the road for a period of time because they were finding some of the chemicals that was leaking off the trucks when they were taking it from out of Niagara Falls to wherever it was, probably in the 30s or 40s. Nobody's really sure even when that happened. But when they decided to reopen so many of those homes around Love Canal, that all we knew people that lived in those homes and were evacuated, and suddenly those houses were fine again. And then you see the next generation of people in the 2000s, since 2000, that have had all kinds of new illnesses so it's not just about the people that happened in the 70s. It's the people that have happened like now. Like it's happening now. It's not leftover from the 70s,
But you're exactly right. In fact, on two things you brought up, because number one, when they allowed people to move back in, they sold those homes at 10% below market value and assured people. In fact, some of the words were, it's the safest place to live, probably. In fact, I've got a quote. I love this. The entire area is probably one of the most tested pieces of property on this planet. It's probably one of the safest places to live. That's what Michael Bazile, who is a spokesperson for EPA, said in 2003 of August. Well, guess what? Those houses were cosmetically improved, painted, washed, and people moved back in. I then represented hundreds of those people in our litigation that started in 2012. So after 2011, when that sewer was opened up and we saw the stuff that was visible right there in the sewer, and then it started coming up in my clients' homes, we started testing homes. And it's almost indescribable. It'd take probably 10 podcasts to describe what happened. But fast forward 14 years of litigation, and a judge dismissed the cases on a legal technicality of preemption. So none of that evidence that we gathered for those 14 years has seen the light of day.
Wow.
What a shame.
It is a shame. And, and Rich, you were talking also about the Lewiston Road. They not only found chemicals, they found radioactive material. And that was one of the big concerns with Lewiston Road is, where is this radioactive slag coming from? And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the gamma flyover studies that were done over Niagara Falls. Have you heard of those?
I have not heard of those actually.
After this podcast, you're probably not going to want to ever have me back. But
No. This is very eye-opening stuff. Honestly, it's very.
It's a little nuts. So in the 1980s, the federal government did what's called a gamma flyover study over Niagara County, Grand Island, and a couple other areas. They were looking for radioactive hotspots, and they found many. Let's just leave it at that. What was happening is a lot of our area factories converted some of their operations over to working on the Manhattan Project for World War II, but also they were experimenting during the Cold War with weapons and making them, irradiated or using fissile materials in these weapons. Well, when you do that, you're also generating waste. So now we have chemical hazardous waste, we have radiological waste. Where do you think that waste went? It's all over Niagara Falls. And one of the ways it got spread is they brought radioactive material to Lewiston and they dumped it on the surface at the Lake Ontario Ordnance Works site, which is right now a big concern. And area contractors mixed it with asphalt. And then they paved people's driveways and they paved Lewiston Road. And it's astonishing because now not only do we have that burden of the chemical exposure, because let's be really clear, we have buried waste, we have waste in our waterways, and we have air pollution. Now we have radiological waste on top of it. And again, I don't remember anybody warning me growing up how dangerous it was and what we were exposed to. And it's not right. These companies knew. They 100% knew. I have memos that I have read. For example, we have a memo called the Bootstrap memo. It's very interesting. And, at that time, Hooker Chemical Corporation did an assessment and they said, we've got some really big problems. For example, this one particular chemical, C56, I don't think there's anything more dangerous that humankind has created on this earth. We've got C56 being incinerated at various places in Niagara Falls, and that means fly ash was coming out over us. It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling.
So I know when we talked on the phone, after I first reached out to, we talked on the phone for a little bit, and you were telling me a little bit about, some of the studies, the team that you said you're working with a team now that we're doing studies that, we're finding out that the Love Canal chemicals, are leaking again or have been leaking still. Is that some of the stuff that you talk about in your new book that's coming out too as well?
Yes, I do address the new litigation and the new problem. And in fact, I think I include some pictures in there as well. We have hundreds of pictures of these contaminants surfacing in the ground, in sump pumps, and also in Cuga Creek. And Niagara Falls, and I'm not really sure I understand why this is the case. I think I know, but I'm not going to say that publicly. They've been putting these bypass pumps in the down gradient sewer lines out of Love Canal. So Love Canal's sewers are combined and then they split into sanitary and storm. And what they were doing is putting bypass pumps to take what was coming out of Love Canal and put it into the storm only, which comes into Cuga Creek. So I'm watching all of these outfalls, and then I would see fish die as they would swim into what's coming out of the outfall, which was clearly not a normal substance. So I actually have video and pictures of fish swimming into this stuff and dying on film. So forget the experts. You can believe your eyes when you see pretty astonishing things in your sump pump. There's another way that people can tell, by the way. You can get a black light, and these are hydrocarbons that we're dealing with. They fluoresce under a black light. And so a lot of people have been putting a black light into their sump pump or their drains. And if it just lights up, that would be another little clue that there might be a potential problem.
That's I feel like my head's like exploding. There's so much that I just didn't even know about before. It's like very eye opening.
Happy.
It's very eye opening right now.
Yeah.
Honestly, like I mean, obviously I knew Love Canal was like a big thing, but that's kind of like the most you hear about it, though. Is just that
Yes.
all these chemicals were buried there, in the 70s or whatever, and they kind of they cleaned it up the best they could, and now it is what it is. That's kind of pretty much all you hear about it.
It's all we heard about. And, there's some sites that are so famous. That Necco Park site I told you about, we have scientists that came from overseas to study how Napple was moving in that site. It was so much. It was like a lake of Napple. The 102nd Street site, right? No one ever hears about that one either. That site is astonishing for so many reasons. One of them is Hooker was dumping an Olin on the surface. So if you look at aerial pictures, you will see a mess because they were dumping several times more than Love Canal. Remember I told you Love Canal is 21,800 tons. Yeah. Well, over there on 102nd Street, which is really the other end of Love Canal where William Love was originally excavating.
Doggy Phil.
We have some estimates are 93,000. I actually have seen up to 163,000 tons, but to be safe, say between 63 and 93, way bigger than Love Canal. And that was at surface. So try to imagine where all of that waste was going into the Niagara River. Oh. And the only thing they buried there was phosphorus so that it didn't blow up. We never heard about that.
That's crazy.
I believe I saw your dog roll off the chair, and now he's behind the sign. That's the funniest thing ever.
He's a big boy.
He's
he's over there, and he's very beautiful. He's a Native American Indian dog. He's a very unusual dog. And unfortunately, I've been bringing my dogs to landfill sites over the years. And I'm kind of regretting that now. My other dog was just diagnosed with a cancer. And ironically, it is the same cancer that my father had, which is very, very rare. And I don't even know how to process that. It is so distressing.
Yeah, I can imagine. So do you go ahead? You want to say something?
What made you become a lawyer? All the stuff you grew up with, and you wanted to help the residents, or?
It's actually a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. A couple things. First of all, my dad had always wanted to be a lawyer, so I think he used to whisper in my ear, what kind of lawyer you're going to be, not do you want to be a lawyer? But I had a situation when I was in 6th grade, and it was very impactful for me. And I know it's going to sound goofy, but my dad was a very patriotic person. He made us read the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And there was a line, of course, all men are created equal. And I was talking about this with friends on the bus, and I had one of my friends say, if that were true, then my brother wouldn't, and I won't repeat what she said, but he had some special needs. And I was very stumped. So I went home and I was like, Dad, this person's not equal. He's got, these particular issues. And my dad had said to me that we are all equal in terms of dignity and the rights that we hold, but not everybody has the ability to articulate that and to protect those rights. And he said, that's what a lawyer does. And I'm not kidding. From that moment on, and mind you, Love Canal was unfolding as I was, 8, 9, 10 years old. But I really was like, I want to be that kind of person that helps people who can't protect themselves. So I wrote in my 8th grade journal that I wanted to live in Georgia, Tennessee, have a horse, and be a lawyer. And interestingly, I did live in Georgia, Tennessee, and became a lawyer.
Oh, there you go.
Oh,
that
so you
funny?
went to Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
That's right in Tennessee. So, and then I practiced for the first half of my career. I wasn't an environmental lawyer then, I was an intellectual property lawyer. And I thought I was done lawyering. I came back to this area and I just wanted to write books. And I was like, I'm never practicing law again. But then my dad got diagnosed with this exceedingly rare cancer. And we were told by Roswell that you only have this cancer, it's only associated with two things: dioxin, which I mentioned earlier, and radioactivity. And I was like, where would my dad have been exposed to those two things? So I was already kind of doing some research. I was already very concerned about a few things because of my cancer. And I started with this list I found of 89 sites. And I was flabbergasted. And I was like, I have to research every one of these 89 sites because maybe this is where my dad had his exposure. As it turns out, my great grandfather worked at Carborundum for 44 years. My grandfather, 46 years.
My
My dad,
grandfather worked there too for a little bit.
your grandfather did.
Oh yeah, for a little bit. Yep.
Well, what they failed to tell my father, grandfather, and great grandfather, I don't know about your grandfather, these men and women were being exposed to radioactive isotopes, ionizing radiation, both uranium and plutonium. It's pretty unbelievable. And my dad's cancer is literally only linked, by the way, to that ionizing radiation. That's like the farmers link. And so when he told me about being at Carborundum for these 5 years that he was there, that's what got me really researching. And I was astonished at what I learned. This book is born out of literally the next 22 years of research. And I couldn't understand how he was diagnosed with something so rare, really rare. And so, I wanted some answers. And if I needed answers, I know other people needed answers in Niagara Falls because all my family, it was cousins and aunts and uncles and classmates. I can't even tell you how many people I have lost to cancer and chronic illness. It's not just cancer; it's chronic illness and cancer, and it's too many people.
Yeah, I actually there's a few cancer diagnoses in my family too. My mom had breast cancer. My aunt got a very rare cancer, was esophageal cancer,
Yeah.
which she ended up having stage 4, uncurable, which she lived with for 10+ years.
Wow.
Who she just passed recently, a year or so ago. But my mom's got stuff. My mom's got like rheumatoid arthritis, stuff like that. She's got, my whole family's riddled with chronic disease, chronic illnesses and stuff. So it doesn't surprise me that it could have been probably linked to all the toxicity. Sorry.
Well, I was looking at something before we got on the podcast. It's the 2022-2024 Community Services Plan from Niagara Falls Memorial Medical Center, their community needs assessment. And there were a couple lines in there that I couldn't even believe it. They said Niagara County has high rates of chronic disease, particularly as it relates to cardiovascular disease, disease of the heart, diabetes, cancer. But then it goes on to talk about how high these numbers are. They're pretty shocking. Like, it was one thing, like, for example, it says the cancer incidence rate in Niagara County, 758 per 100,000, is significantly higher than the New York State rate of 587. So New York State is 587 per 100,000. Niagara County is somehow 758 per 100,000. This is according to the community health needs assessment. That's a statistically improbable difference.
Yeah.
That's not just, give or take a couple points, right?
Mm.
But if you look at all chronic disease, all the numbers are that scary. What are we doing?
Yeah, at this point, there's kind of, anybody that's in any kind of position of power. It's kind of, you know what I mean? At this point, you're just blatantly ignoring it, and you're choosing not to do anything about it. Which kind of, you know, like I said before we got on the podcast, I knew a little bit. You know, I knew enough here from here and there, but you know, the more you've told us tonight,
Not to this extent.
yeah, I'm kind of like, you know, it kind of upsets me a little bit that, you know, we're living in this and nobody that is in any kind of power that could do anything even cares.
I
Me
know.
and Yoda were kind of just weird, kind of basically just talking about this on the way here because we were talking about, you know, the meeting they just had for the data center or whatever. And I said, well, at least, you know, anybody in power doesn't care what's going to happen here because it's not going to bother them. You know what I mean? Their pockets are being laced, so they could care less.
Yep. And it goes back to the roots of Niagara's exploitation of electric power and water. You know, these chemical companies came here because they had access to cheap power, but they also had access to the Niagara River to cool their processes and cool their equipment. And that's why these data centers want to be here. You know, it's just the next wave of capitalists who are taking advantage of us.
100%.
So yeah, before we get out of here for the night, I just want to just a few more questions I wanted to ask about some stuff. Just like the one thing I wanted to ask is, other than, you know, you and your team finding out, you know, doing studies that the chemicals are still leaking, why do you think Love Canal is still such a big topic all these years later? Like, why do you think it's still such a big thing?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think a couple reasons. Number one, it was one of the first times in history that people really banded together and demanded action in that chemical realm when we were dealing with hazardous waste. Up until that time, the regular people, didn't know how big of an issue hazardous waste was. And the chemical companies knew, and government officials largely knew. But I think that's one of the reasons why Love Canal endures, because it's a symbol of people, you know, coming together, demanding action. And some of their methods may not fly today. You know, they took EPA officials hostage for a little while. I think it might have been with the permission of the EPA officials. I'm not sure,
Yeah.
but I've heard word. But just the fact that people who were referred to as, you know, blue collar workers, housewives, and believe it or not, that was like the third time in Niagara's history where that happened, especially with women led activism. It actually happened once before in 1901. Nobody knows this about our history, but we had a factory that located here in 1899, right where the aquarium is. It was the Acre Process Company. It was a big one, and they were manufacturing chlorine products and putting a huge amount. I can't even begin to tell you how much. So much chlorine into the air out their stack. Well, women in the neighborhood were like, "You're killing our trees, our plants. All of our metal is turning black, and we're now starting to have health effects." They actually brought a lawsuit and won. This is crazy. No one even knows about this case.
No.
But to me, Love Canal was another example where it was men and women, but a lot of women were kind of the motivating force here and said, we're not accepting this. So I think that's one of the reasons why it endures. Another reason is because it was so stealthy and so scary. You always think in terms of, do we have another Love Canal? You know, and I think that's another reason why it's always in the back of our minds. We don't want to be taken by surprise by an entire industry again. You know?
It's very I don't know, I'm like kind of like at a loss of words of what to say about it.
Yo, I got a quick question. Do you think the Toxicity Avengers came from there?
The Toxic Avenger? I
Yeah.
don't know about all that.
Yeah, hey, it could be.
Yeah, the cartoon
Yeah.
superhero. I don't know the origin story. I just know in the back of my mind that we need one.
Yeah, we do. I mean,
I'm just saying, what Love Canal is the source of Toxicity Avengers?
it wouldn't surprise
Wait.
me, honestly.
We got a title of the TV show now. Toxicity of Niagara Falls.
Another question I had too was, what would you say personally, as somebody you know who's done research, has like a team that knows about the original incident, and then knows about some of the other toxic stuff around here? What would you say to somebody that said, "Oh, well, I think the whole Love Canal situation was cleaned up and we're good to go"?
Yeah, and a lot of people do believe that. Um, I think I would tell them this. First of all, there's no such thing as cleaning up these kinds of chemicals because they are in soil, they're in waterways, they bioaccumulate in people and animals. But more importantly, the liners that we use to barricade these chemicals all eventually leak. All
Mm.
liners leak. Love Canal and others around Niagara Falls were liners that were some of the first of their class in the 80s and 90s. We were just figuring this stuff out. That's what's protecting us. Our 42-year-old liners that, as I told you, our Love Canals is 40 mil, 1 millimeter. And that's kind of a scary prospect because we're relying on a lot of systems going right and perfectly well in order to keep us safe. But more importantly, and this is the scariest thing probably I'm going to say all day, the only routine monitoring at Love Canal right now are groundwater wells. So they're not doing routine surface water, soil, biota, animals and people, or air. They're relying on groundwater wells. Well, this stuff that's coming out of Love Canal doesn't necessarily follow groundwater. It's non-aqueous phase liquid, NAPL. So how are you catching NAPL with a groundwater well when a groundwater well is not designed to capture that? And that's our only form of ongoing routine monitoring at Love Canal, at least as of when I confirmed that in a letter with officials. So when people tell me, well, everyone tells us it's fine, there's no problem, I have grave concerns. And I'm not the only one who has grave concerns because Congress did an assessment of the habitability study where everybody moved back into Love Canal. And Congress had a technical arm at the time. They put out a report, and their report raised the very same concerns and said, where's the routine monitoring? It needs to be in place. And it's not.
Oh man, it's sad. Honestly, it's very upsetting. Stuff like this happens, and it's still happening every day right now, and we're still living with it, and nothing's even being said about it.
What doesn't help when the current administration is cutting like positions in the EPA, so like now their hands are tied because there's only 20 instead of 100 people.
Yep. I agree with you. And there's no money. I've had multiple people hear from county health and state health that there wasn't money to do further testing at their home. I know somebody who had county health finally sent someone over with what's called a PID meter, which is kind of a field instrument for finding just a certain class of chemicals, these VOCs. And they got a very high number reading. Well, guess what? They were told there's no more money to do any further investigation, to contact your lawyers, and hopefully they can get you some help. So between the lack of people power, the lack of money, the lack of interest, do you want another Love Canal situation that's another black eye? No, they don't. And I think it's a bad combination.
So yeah, the only real thing that I'd love to ask is I just kind of want to know from like your perspective of if you could see any kind of change or anything come out of something like this, what would like what would your ideal scenario be for something like this, like moving forward?
Yeah, that's another great question. Number one, I want the facts on the table. I want people to understand why they're so sick and what happened to us. Number two, I want there to be some accountability. We have major chemical conglomerates who are run by big chemical families who I believe owe us some accountability, if not reparations in money. So I want to see some change along those lines as well. Third, I want to see people come here and study Niagara Falls. To me, Niagara Falls is a beacon for the rest of the world. This is going on elsewhere. Hazardous waste is elsewhere. Nobody has good solutions for it. But if you want to see how chemicals impact people, you got to come to Niagara Falls because we are seeing it in the form of, I believe, and again, this is just my opinion, I'm not a doctor, very high rates of illness, very high rates of mental health problems, especially suicide, very high rates of violent crime. Now you're going to say, well, how is violent crime related to exposure to chemicals? Well, guess what? The research is all pointing that way. We already knew lead, right? That's the Mad Hatter syndrome. We know the lead crime theory. We're starting to see the research that is confirming that the chemicals all around Niagara Falls are tied to later violent crime. So if a child is exposed, they're much more likely to commit violent crime when they are an adult, when they have these exposures. So I want researchers here, and it's time now to get some answers and accountability.
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if nothing else, they at least owe us that much, is to hear somebody take some accountability for it and not try to just sweep it under the rug.
Exactly.
I
think,
agree.
I think it's a very serious thing that, I think the way it got national news when the original Love Canal disaster happened, I think it needs to be that big again. Like, I think people need to know just how serious it still is and that it's still happening.
Absolutely appreciate you guys shining a light on this. And that's my goal with the book, is to shine a light on this, demand some accountability, and now we're going to do something about it.
Well, I can't speak for the other guys, but I'm very excited to read it. I don't even really like reading books, really, but I'm very excited to take
I
it.
just pre-ordered it.
Take it. Oh, there you go. See, he already pre-ordered it. Look at that.
That's awesome, and I really appreciate it.
Me with books.
Yeah.
And listen, your questions have been awesome, all of you. Like,
I appreciate
really,
it. Yeah.
really, I'm grateful.
Obviously, this doesn't have to be a one and done thing. We could obviously have you back on at any time if there's anything else you want to talk about, or if you want to even dig deeper into some of the other stuff outside of Love Canal. We're more than happy.
Absolutely, it will be my pleasure.
Yeah.
Also, would you say writing your congressman or local representative would help, or are we past that?
Yo, we're past that.
I know many people have, and they were told that DEC assured them everything is okay, or EPA assured them everything was okay in the case of Love Canal. But you still need to document these things and still inform your people. Like, for example, I always encourage people to send their test results, pictures, concerns, illnesses to their representatives in writing, so that there is a nice paper trail that they are developing. And many people have been doing that. Many, many people.
There you go. If you want an idea on how to start,
Or we got an idea.
Why not?
I got another idea. You pay a bunch of people sickness, you send it to the representatives. Okay, this is going on right now. You lie.
Why would you lie when it's actually happening?
No, I'm saying you lie for them. Like, this is what has happened.
Yeah, well, then they would just say something like, it's not connected.
We're
assured we're not. It's not connected.
I'll make a way to connect something.
But yeah, unless you guys got anything else you want to ask real quick before we get out of here, I think we can let you go.
Hey, when's your book coming out?
It's coming out June 30th. Thank you for asking. Thundering Waters, The Toxic Legacy of Niagara Falls. You can find it at Talking Leaves in Buffalo. You can find it, on Amazon and bookstores and libraries. And I'm very excited because my publisher has been fantastic. They were blown away when they read this. And I will warn you, there's 100 pages of footnotes, because I know people are going to have a lot of questions. So I want them to go look up things if they want to.
That's smart, actually. It's very smart.
Right? It started out as 200 pages of footnotes, but they had to trim it down because it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I want people to be able to tell their stories now. But now you're armed. You've got facts. Now you go tell your story of what happened to you.
So, also, just real quick, would you say there's people out there that, kind of want to do, their own, I don't know, let's say, their own, type of, investigative journalism type of stuff on something like this? Would you encourage people doing stuff like that, looking and going out there and obviously not putting themselves in harm's way or anything, but, boots on the ground type of work to try and get proof themselves?
Yes, I think people should be using those black lights on their sump pumps. They can be documenting things with pictures. For example, at the 102nd Street dump, there's some pretty suspicious stuff that is surfacing there. And I know that authorities have tried to say it's ionizing bacteria and blah, 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 blah. I don't believe it is. And in fact, they have test results from 2023 showing that that's not what it is. It's PFAS and PFAS. So take pictures of it. Demand some action. Go to your representatives. It's very unusual stuff. And I think people should be concerned when they see things along those lines. When you see, multiple dead animals and it doesn't appear they've been hit by a vehicle or something like that, take pictures. We have trees, for example, that are falling over at the root, not at the root, above the root, right at the base of the tree. When it falls over, all black stuff is inside the tree, and it's rainbow colored and iridescent. So so there are certainly organic things that can cause discoloration inside of a tree, but when trees are in a suspicious area and they're uptaking rainbow colors, we need to pay attention. We got a lot of those. So take pictures.
Kind of makes me want to, like grab a camera and go out and start doing my own research. Man.
Hey,
I'm
can we do like the Blair Witch Project and like start running away from the toxic people?
This in a way, you kind of inspire me, open my eyes to what's really happening. So I'm glad that I know more about it now. Thanks to you. Thank you for
absolutely. It's my pleasure. And again, thank you. And your questions are so awesome. So thank you again.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah.
I heard there's like people that live around there still. There's like weird people like there was a lady you go by her house, she throw.
I was actually going to say this too, but I didn't want to sound rude. But when I was growing up, obviously, into my early teens, one of the big things that people would claim was that there was a lady that lived in a house back there who, because of the chemical dump, she went crazy and decapitated her entire family. And if you drove by her house, she would come out throwing rocks at you and stuff. I always kind of obviously attributed that to just like local folklore and somebody made up and people just ran with it. But that was like the big Love Canal story when I was growing up, because people would talk about that a lot.
I will say that I don't know about anyone decapitating their family, but although we do have some very serious crimes that occurred with people who lived in Love Canal, very serious. But to me, I think these chemicals are neurotoxins, and they're working on your nervous system. So that's why I believe in the falls we see very significant mental health challenges. And I do believe there's a connection. Again, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a psychiatrist, but I can tell you that through my research, through interviewing people, I am very concerned about those connections with serious neurobehavioral and mental health problems and exposure.
Oh, well, I mean, there you go. Real quick, just wanted to say thank you for joining us. This was awesome. I'm glad I'm glad we got in touch. Hopefully we can sit down again at some point for another episode.
Yeah.
I'm sure we're not going to run out of things to talk about now that we know. So
we'll have some happier things maybe to talk about.
Okay.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you for joining us. So yeah, I guess that's it. That's it from us. So
have a great night, guys. It was wonderful meeting you.
Thank you. It was nice meeting you too.
And bye, Rich.
Don't forget to check on your homies. 988.
That's supposed to when she's off the screen, man.
It don't matter.
Man, we almost just took almost like